who were some of the artists show? We had Jenny Holzer in the show. So these are some of her big installations that are like museum. You can actually see that one of them, the one on the lower left, is at the Whitney. You can recognize the grid ceiling. But she's known for these scrolling text installations. We, for our 25th anniversary show, the body gesture show, the feminist art show, we had one of our big scrolling text pieces. 30th anniversary, sorry. That's right, 25th was collage. The 30th anniversary, we had one of those 25th. Those were valued at that time, which has been 4 years ago, they were about $350,000. Was about the value. We have this piece, which is one of her really early pieces, her inflammatory essays. They were done between 78 and 80, I believe. We have this 10-part piece at $3,000. We haven't sold it yet. I don't know if we still have it or not. I have to check. But one, while the show was up, one sold at auction for $4,000. So just kind of to show you some context about things we're bringing in. We also have Barbara Kruger in the show, also known for these huge immersive installations. Also really famous, you probably recognize the I Shop Therefore I Am piece, which is a piece that she did. You know, it's like an old credit card ad from right when credit cards were coming out, the person was holding the card. She then, her background was actually in advertising. She moved into contemporary art, and actually if you pay attention, you can see that a lot of advertisers have now re-adopted her style with the black and white image in red. We had a really fun small piece, an addition piece called Culture Vulture that was part of the show. And then Ham Plenza, the Spanish-born artist, I don't know how you can see the mesh wire giant head in the upper right. That piece is almost identical to one that's in the Venice Biennale, which just opened. The drawing on the left, which is not projecting super well. If you're interested, it's actually hanging in the back. You can at the end see it a little better. But creating figures with letter forms and text, different materials. He did have work in the Portland Art Museum's Disquieted show a few years ago. Some of you might remember there were 3 big fiberglass heads, similar to the Echo piece, which is now the Seattle Art Museum just purchased and is part of the Olympic Sculpture Park. And then the small sculpture of the figure, although it's not really small, it's life-size, but the figure at the bottom right is actually from the same body of work as the drawing, where the figure is made up of these letter forms in metal. We also had Jack Pearson in the show. The piece Cry was actually one that we had in the show. We didn't place it. It's actually going to a museum show after ours. But the one Destiny was actually a picture I took at Art Basel Beach this last December. That piece was, I think, if I recall correctly, $350,000, and then the Cry piece we had was $150,000. But because we know that everyone can collect in that market range, we also did a show recently of these addition pieces down below, the Movie Star and Trust, which are collage prints, addition pieces, and those were $3,500. And I think, did the only show in the United States. That publisher was in Europe, and by the time our show closed, there was a fair right around the time of our show, and they had actually sold out most of the edition. But there were a few people here who bought them, which was great. It was a great opportunity. And then also one other example, our show Through the Lens that we did to tie into the museum. The Portland Art Museum did the show Blue Sky for their 40th anniversary. We did a photography at the same time, and we featured a number of artists, some local and some nationally known. One of them was Dick Muniz. You can kind of recognize that iconic image of Jackson Pollock making the drip painting. In this case, Dick Muniz has remade that image in chocolate syrup. It's kind of one of the, then photographed it, and the photograph is what is then sold. And it's an example of him taking an iconic image and remaking it in some sort of everyday material. The example on the left, which isn't projecting super well, is a magazine page. It's collage, but it isn't adhered. It's more like in the practice of Tibetan Buddhist sand painting or something, where everything is assembled as a temporary basis to be documented as a photograph and then sold as a photograph. And you might know his work if you're interested in it. It's a great film, but he did this great documentary called Wasteland that was of all different photos made with trash in favelas. He's a Brazilian artist, and this is an example of one of the works from that series. So you can kind of see, this is those are actually, some of those forms are actually like hot water heaters and crates and big things. So he'll lay out these huge recreations of iconic images on a large scale with everyday materials. Harry Maylene, a Portland-born artist who has moved to San Francisco to become a become a dancer, and then has gone on to become a visual artist. She just won a, maybe last year, maybe 2 years ago, won a MacArthur Genius Fellowship grant. We have this great piece called Ella on Silk, edition of 20. She made it for Prospect 3, the New Orleans Biennial. We had an example, we had an edition here. We still have it, and actually it's on hold for the Portland Art Museum. They are hunting for donors, actually, to keep it here in Portland. People are giving small pledges. It's kind of a cumulative process.
It's a beautiful piece. It's
And it's in the back, so people can see it afterwards if you like. Chuck Close, many people know these colorful pieces on the right. An example of one of his self-portraits. He also is known and really has shifted with it as with his illness. He's really shifted using a lot of Polaroid photographs. So this was actually a huge scale Polaroid of Bill T. Jones. We also featured Isaac Lehman. He did do a lot of figurative portraits, but he did do some, and we featured one of those. This is a piece of an analog stereo cabinet photograph from the back with multiple perspective points, and it's a layering of images. He did make some their composite image. This particular one is in the Seattle Art Museum's collection. He won the Betty Bowen Award in 2008 from them, and they purchased this piece. Another pair of his works, and these are in the collection of the U of O Art Museum. Another one which is in the Portland Art Museum's collection, and another one that we featured in Miami. Very simple works, but beautiful. Pat Steer, you might recognize this as well. This is not from one of our group show maybe
Yeah, it was a
8 years
color
ago.
field show. We had Joe Mitchell at under $1 million. Those paintings are like hundreds of millions. And then Pat Steer and Willie Heeks and Judy Cook. It was a great painting show. That's on loan for Portland.
Yes, it's on loan from a private collection at the Portland Art Museum. That was about 10 years, what year was the year? Maybe 10 or 12 years ago. It's tripled in value in that time, which is kind of amazing. But we also did a show of her prints. So we actually did a show of her monoprints and screen prints. And so the paintings are in the 100,000 range, the monoprints were in the 10,000 to 15,000 range, and the screen prints were, I think they were very popular, they were at 5,000. Hans Hoffman's another artist we've included in group shows, an oil painting, a painting on paper, and an ink piece. I don't know the exact values of them now, but again, somewhere there was where a painting on canvas might be in the 150 range, a painting on paper might be in the 50 range, and when we had for the 25th anniversary, which is just when I had started, when we had these great ink on paper pieces, he had done them, they were very seminal works. Right after he left Germany in the 30s and was in Provincetown, he did this series of these ink pieces, and they were 4,500 when we had them, and someone very intelligently bought all 8 of them, and I had them, installed them in their home. They're now each about 12, but just showing that there's a range with each of these artists. And then we also will do shows of multiples to kind of give continue giving more context. So there's a Rauschenberg sculpture on the left, which you might recognize from our Art Museum collection, Patrician Barnacle. We also read years ago did a show of a number of his multiples. The one on the left in this image, which is called Slink, was from his Morocco series, and we happened to do our show of Rauschenberg prints right after the Morocco series had come out. And a few people were very intelligently, very smartly bought that in one of those editions, and they were 3,800, and now they're about 12,000, which is kind of amazing. But another artist that's local that we show that has a relationship to that, I would say, is Mark Smith. Also using everyday images, also using pattern, also using color, also using fabric, appropriating a lot of different materials to create a work. And they don't necessarily, there isn't an obvious correlation, but knowing his process, I see the context there where they understand, where they relate to each other. Richard Serra, we've done a number of shows of his etchings. This is a pair from the Path and Edges series. You may recognize the sculptures on the left. There's the upper one is this Olympic Sculpture Park in Seattle, and the lower one is from Bilbao. And then an image of a show of etchings on the right, and some large prints in the image on the right here. There's the diptych. Those etchings are in like the 30,000 range. But then the small junctions, which is kind of an aerial view, if you can kind of see these forms in the bottom left, these large, huge sculptures where you kind of walk inside them, those aerial views are then kind of created in these junction series. And I think those were in the 2,500 range. So our mission is always about figuring out a way to give people the opportunity to have work that they really love. An artist, Julie Mangold, who's mentioned earlier, is some examples of her work, and we've shown her in conjunction with Richard Serra. Baldessari is also an artist who we've shown prints of. This is some of the works from the News series, where he's taking images of everyday images and combining them with text from newspapers and had that juxtaposition as being not matching. He's been in the Whitney Biennial 12 times. He's a super important artist and very undervalued in terms of the market. This is the Cliché series. We've included them a few times. And then locally, we just in our Words, Words, Words show had Michelle Ross, an artist who's doing something very similar, taking an image from pop culture, from a magazine, from a newspaper, and then working on the surface. And I think these were under 1,000. And then we're now, that's sort of like, that's kind of how we create the context. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the strategies. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Yes.
You mentioned one of my favorite people, Lee Kelly. I have a Lee Kelly that I bought for you. This is a collage which I just adore, and it's the only kind of Lee Kelly that I could have ever acquired, and I'm just so glad I had that opportunity.
Lee Kelly is a major regional, I mean, he was the first regional artist that I started to work with. I think Daniel was just creating context in the last couple shows. We can't possibly mention every artist, but he's a great artist. And he also has work in collections outside of the area. I mean, he's what I would call almost a modernist artist, and I think that part of some of what the imagery of what Daniel showed, like the Hoffman and whatnot, a lot of times when you think about building a collection, you think about where do you want to focus, you know, your energies. Are you focused on photography? Are you focused on regional? Are you buying just what you like? After you've built your collection for a while, you can walk around your house and go, God, I love abstract art, but everything in my house is a figurative narrative. It's like, what do you want to live with? And I think that, you know, we'll talk about some strategies in terms of establishing budgets. You know, I've been very lucky, you know, I've met people just on the gallery floor, like Sarah Miller-Meggs, who I bought the building with, who opened the lumber room. We built together an amazing collection between 2004 and 2007. It was an amazing time to buy art. I also helped the Witzels build a collection. So the Witzels were buying modernism, like Hoffman, Frankenthaler. And if you follow the auctions lately, those prices are outrageous. And I actually did just help somebody buy a Frankenthaler under the market. Still, incredible amount of money. So then you have modernism, and you have a global demand for art now. It's crazy. You've got Russian heiresses walking in. You think that, you know, Richter at $1 million, 10 million, you know, they're just like, yeah, we'll take it, you know. And, you know, the ruble is on the auction. It's on the auction market as well as other forms of currency. So modernism is, you know, maybe prints you could still acquire, but that is almost an area where people are now moving. You know, you've got pop, that's also just exploded in terms of value. So people are looking at the emerging artists or, you know, ways to acquire some of these blue chip artists through multiples. So I think every time I sit down with somebody, I essentially establish what kind of art do you like? What kind of art reflects you? Do you like representation? Do you like abstract? And there are things like artsy. Is it artsy? I think it is. I'm just tired. Yeah.
Well, arts is a thing.
Yeah, where people can build lists of artists that they like. And then, you know, either talk to people in for art council about that or with the local gallery. And then some people just know what they want. They come into the gallery and they respond. But sometimes it is helpful to have conversations about what is the kind of art that you want to live with. And it may be that you just buy a piece or two a year, and that's partly something we'll talk about. Because managing the art after a while becomes, a bit of a challenge. How do you fit everything into your house? And when is enough enough? And I don't know, it's kind of like a nice bug. I like to buy art too. So those are general thoughts, but I think we've got some more specific ideas.
Great, so I think one of the things that's really, one of the things I think people often come in and I hear people say, well, I really like that, but I'm not sure it's the right choice. So one of the things I thought we just wanted to do is talk a little bit about some strategies. So I think it's important to educate yourself about art and collecting. I think if you look at some of the major collectors, one of the things they do is they really spend a lot of time looking. So, some of the strategies, some of the things to do to educate yourself is visit the galleries in Portland. When you travel, go and visit galleries. A lot of cities have an art dealers association. You can go, okay, I'm going to go to San Francisco. I'll look up the San Francisco Art Dealers Association and see what galleries I should visit. Join a museum and visit often. I volunteer on a group at a council at the museum, and in our newsletter, we list what's new in the galleries. And so I go through the galleries at least once a month and look and see what's new. And it's amazing how much changes, actually. There might be 8 new things every month. And so I suggest people go to museums, see their shows, visit them often, attend artist talks and lectures. I think having an understanding of something makes it more accessible. Visit private collections. The lumber room Elizabeth mentioned, upstairs, she does have public hours. It's great to see what's in other people's collections. Some of the Art Council Museum provide opportunities to visit collections. I think pick favorites and follow them. I also, if you have a favorite artist, follow them. Go see every show. Really start to follow something. Follow a gallery, follow an artist, follow a few artists, and you really start to educate your eye about what they're doing and how that relates to larger things. Read reviews about what you see. If you see a show you think it's interesting, and then you see in the paper or magazine there's a review, it's great to read that because you see what a critic's perspective is on it is, and you can kind of compare that to your experience. And build a relationship with the gallery. I think one of the beauties of having a really accessible group of galleries in Portland is that you're able to go in and build a relationship with the people who work there, and that gives you more access than you would necessarily have otherwise. And also, I think define and trust your taste. I can't really stress that enough. People so often say, oh, I don't know if this is the right choice, I don't know if this is a good choice. If you like it, you like it, and I think that's as good a reason as any to live with it. And I think there's another strategy around that.
So you think about it a lot. There was the Seattle Art Fair, which is coming back up again July 30. I had somebody saying, 10 years ago I saw this photograph, I'm still thinking about it. I'm like, how much was it? $400. Oh my God. I have no idea how to find a photograph. But if you think about it, one of the first pieces of art I bought was the St. Francis Opera Tin. And I was in my 30s. And I went to New York and I saw this beautiful piece. I'm like, oh my God, I love it, but I don't want to commit. It was like, I don't know how much it was. But the next day I really ran down 57th Street and I busted through the door. Is that still available? You could have called us, they said. they weren't that and I want to buy that. But when you really think about something, also sometimes when art challenges you, when it gets under your skin, you really want to pay attention to how you feel when you look at something. Especially also if you can't forget thinking about it. And galleries do let you take things on approval. We ship things more often than not, even from different parts of the country, and we take things from the gallery, and it's worth it. If you think you might like something, ask to live with it for a couple of days. It makes a difference, no matter how big it is.
So some strategies. I think setting goals is important. I collect on a different scale than a number of our clients, but I also am buying and collecting art myself. I try and buy one piece a year. For everyone, that's going to be different depending on what you can do. I have a friend who also buys one piece a year, and she has a whole system for that, which is actually in the next slide, but I'll mention it now because it came up. But she says I buy one piece a year and I do payments on it, and I just make sure that I do it so that my last payment can be the week of my birthday, and it's my gift to myself. You know, and for you know, everyone has to come up with different strategies. But I think, you know, figuring out what your goals are, thinking about, you know, what is it that you want, and everyone has different goals. These are just some examples, but you know, I'd like to buy a piece a year, and I kind of follow whatever my whim is that year. And sometimes it's an impulse. Sometimes we've had artists call and say, you know, you've had that piece a while, I'd like to bring it back to the studio. And I'm like, oh, the idea of never seeing that piece again. I'm like, oh, you can't, I'll buy it.